Good afternoon, Oregon conservation community. My name is Vanessa Green, and I am the Executive Director of the Network of Oregon Watershed Councils. And I will be facilitating today's webinar on behalf of the Oregon Conservation Partnership, which includes my organization and also the Oregon Association of Conservation Districts and the Coalition of Oregon Land Trusts and OCEAN, the arm that does education training. So we are happy to feature today a talk on partnership opportunities with drinking water providers. And we are featuring Julie Harvey, who is the program coordinator for drinking water protection at Oregon DEQ. And Julie is a registered geologist with over 30 years of experience in environmental assessment and protection. She is currently the Drinking Water Protection Coordinator with the Oregon Department of Environmental Quality, where she focuses on assisting public water systems officials, local government officials, state, federal agencies, and interested communities to develop local strategies for protecting their drinking water. We'll also be joined by panel members. On screen today, you see Dr. John Sauter. He is Assistant Professor with Oregon State University Extension Service, and he works under contract to Oregon State University from the Coos SWCD to prepare a drinking water protection plan for the city of Myrtle Point. We also have Michelle Smith. She is the water project manager for the Coalition of Oregon Land Trusts, where she supports land trusts working to protect Oregon's source drinking watersheds. We will be joined on the phone by Jared Waybright. He is the Executive Director of the McKenzie Watershed, where he has partnered with Eugene Water and Electric Board and has tapped into both drinking water provider partnership grants as well as the State Source Protection Fund grants. A word about Jared is that he had a tight schedule, and so he agreed to join us, but he's going to only be here for a portion of the time, and he's going to be here only on audio. And so I will run his slides, and we'll just have to roll with that technical challenge as we roll with many others. So bear with us. I also want to let you know he has to leave a little bit early. So the way that we will focus this talk is the first half hour belongs to Julie Harvey, who's going to offer a broad overview of the topic. And then we will go through each of our three guests. And we'll have Jared go first because he has to leave a little bit early. And we'll also hear from John and Michelle. It's a panel presentation at that point, and so be thinking of the kinds of questions that you might ask, and you might have a question for just one of the presenters, or you might have a question that pertains to all, and just be sure to tell me what you would like to do in your question as you type it. Some housekeeping things. To ask questions, there's two ways to do it. Number one way is to type it into the chat function to me, and I'm happy to read your question out loud for you. Another way is there's a little hand icon that pops up for you. If you click on the hand, it alerts me, and I can click on it and unmute you so that you can ask the question yourself. Either way is okay with me, and we're happy to do that. This talk is brought to you by our sponsorship from the Oregon Watershed Enhancement Board, and we're grateful for their support and our ability to bring good topics and speakers your way. With that said, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Ms. Julie Harvey. Thank you, Julie.
Great. Hi, and I'm so glad to have this opportunity today to speak with all of you. I always get some of this interaction at Connect, and because we didn't have that this year, I think we're all missing that. So I really appreciate the conservation partnerships pulling together these webinars and helping us still get the information out. So like Vanessa said, I'm with the Drinking Water Protection Program at Oregon DEQ. And just to give you a little background on that, it is a joint program between the Oregon Health Authority and the Department of Environmental Quality focused on public health. So the Oregon Health Authority implements the Safe Drinking Water Act in Oregon. And if we look at it from a multi-barrier approach, the Health Authority really focuses on the treatment, monitoring, and compliance that you see on the right-hand side of this figure. whereas DEQ is focused on the source water protection component of that and the reduction of contaminant threats within the watershed or the aquifers that contribute water to public drinking water supplies. Like I said, it's a joint program. There are several people at OHA that work specifically on source water protection, and they focus primarily on the groundwater aspects. And then the DEQ folks focus on the surface water, but we can help with both. The regulatory framework is sort of important because the source water protection piece of this is implemented under the Clean Water Act. And that's part of why OHA brought DEQ into this early on, is because we are the agency that implements the Clean Water Act, and drinking water is an important beneficial use under that. And so the overriding theme is that when that source water meets the Clean Water Act standards, conventional treatment is adequate. And that's one of the goals, is so that water systems have sort of the cleanest water to work with so that they can adequately treat it and meet those Safe Drinking Water Act requirements for public health. So I know this map's a little hard to see, but there, just to give you a feel of what is a public water system in Oregon, public water systems serve anything over 25 people or 10 connections. So it's everything from our small mobile home parks all the way up to the big cities and their populations. There's over 2,500 of them throughout the state. The areas in yellow on this map are source areas. They're watersheds that provide water to a drinking water intake for a public water system. So as you can see, there's most of Western Oregon and some smaller pieces of Eastern Oregon are covered by those drinking water source areas. There's about 160 of them throughout the state, different public water systems. Those smaller brown little tiny dots are the groundwater drinking water source areas. Those are typically smaller because they're calculated at either 10 to 15 year time of travel to a well or a spring that is being used for public water. But all of the programs that I'm talking about today apply to all of those areas. So you can see there's a pretty wide brush of areas where there is an intersection of drinking water source areas with the work that you folks are doing in your communities. Part of the reason that I'm talking to you here today, and that I really want to get have that interaction going on, is that water systems have really limited resources, and they wear so many hats in their community. And because source water protection is voluntary in Oregon, it doesn't always rise to the top of their priority list, especially when they are having issues with treatment or distribution or funding or whatever their other issues are. A lot of that source area is also outside of their jurisdiction, so it's an issue that they have a harder time with having the capacity to do. It's generally not their specialty. And so that's why the conservation partners are so important to help with these public water system needs. And it's mutually beneficial. There are very common goals between drinking water and the conservation work that's ongoing throughout the state. Both of you care so much about soil protection, water quality, health of your communities. It's a non-regulatory voluntary approach to encourage adoption of those best management practices. As you know, you guys are often working throughout a watershed to address a wide range of issues, everything from urban to agricultural to forestry to federal lands, and have a similar geographic priority and pollutants as a lot of the work that you're doing. So the mutual benefits, I think, are really are large. And what it can offer you as conservation partners is it really broadens the community support for those conservation and restoration activities. I think Oregon's always been very fish-centric in making sure that we are getting things done to protect habitat and fish. This brings in the other side of that, and so that you have people joining your conversation that are concerned about their own health, their kids' health, their pets' health, or their horses' health. because they all drink that water. So it brings in that whole nother dynamic of people that can care about the projects and advocate for the projects that you folks are doing on the ground. It can enhance both that regional water quality and the land use planning because of the messaging, and it leverages resources that are only available to drinking water providers and drinking water source areas. So it may provide another source of funding for your programs that help both aquatic species, ecosystems, and drinking water. So what I really wanted to go over today is we have a couple of different funding sources that I think are really useful to help sort of get in the door on this type of work, and it's being used throughout Oregon. The first one is our Drinking Water Source Protection Fund grants and loans. These are administered through the Oregon Health Authority and with the help of the Infrastructure Finance Authority, so Business Oregon helps implement these. You can apply, or public water systems, I should say, can apply for grants of up to $30,000 per water system to reduce the risk in the grant area and in the source area. And where these can be really nice is there's no match required for that work, like a 319 or some of our other state funding programs. There are also loans available. These are primarily used in cases where people want to purchase land, because lands can't be purchased with the grant money, but we haven't had a whole lot of interest or use of those, but it's definitely open and available. So as I mentioned, one of the catches to this fund is that the public water system has to apply for the funding, but they can work with partners or contractors to get the work done. So it has to be a community or what's called a nonprofit, non-community water system. Those are things like schools, work sites that use the water part of the day, but all year round, just like a community water system. They have to have a completed source water assessment, and all community and nonprofit or non-community water systems have those at this point. And then they can receive it like 2 consecutive years in a row. So we've had a number of ones that have used that for phase 1 and phase 2, and then they just have to take a year off and the water system can come back after that. So it seems to work out pretty well that way. The letter of interest RFP will open up this coming January. It'll be open through March. And then awarded projects have to spend the money within about 2 years. So it's those short-term projects, which makes sense with the dollar amount of the funding too. It's not, huge, but it can certainly be used to as a piece of a bigger project. Water systems can collaborate on regional or joint projects, and the emergency grants were started a number of years ago after the fire in the Dalles watershed, and are still available today. So there is, at the link below, there's information on both sort of all of the information in the letter of interest and what would be needed to, what the eligibility criteria are and that type of thing, as well as information on those emergency grants. And we have already received, I think, 1, and there's a couple more I know in the works, emergency grants for the 2020 fires that are underway as well. So one example would be the Clackamas River water providers. You have used several of these grants and have developed materials that are used for a lot of different areas as well. They put in signs at the parks and boat ramps encouraging good recreational practices. So that's just one example of something where I think that it overlaps. There are a number of different types of projects that have been funded in the past. We have funded over $2 million of work since 2007 for, I think, about 86 different public water systems throughout the state have benefited from these projects. So you will see on this slide a lot of the types of projects that really intersect with the work that your organizations are doing. So everything from, assisting rural landowners to agricultural landowners to even that enhanced assessment or GIS risk analysis to do watershed planning. Harmful algal blooms are included, and then that road assessment, engineering and design. So these are just examples of projects that have been funded. Within that letter of interest and the information that's on OHA's website, there's a whole list of other things that are eligible projects as well. So I think that you'll see a strong intersection here with the goals of many conservation organizations as well. One example is the Schooner Creek Sediment Reduction Project. This is the drinking water source for the city of Lincoln City out on the coast that has their municipal intake on Schooner Creek. And then there's a road that runs up through a forested area through the watershed. The Salmon Drift Creek Watershed Council, the City of Lincoln City, the Public Works Department, and the National Forest have all partnered together. There's probably other partners that I'm missing on this one too, to do multiple years of work to reduce some of that, those sediment sources, both from the roads and from slides and slumps in the area. They have had combined funding from both the Drinking Water Source Water Protection Fund that I was just talking about, and the Drinking Water Providers Partnership. So the Drinking Water Providers Partnership is a mix of federal and state and nonprofit organizations that have banded together to pool our funds to improve the health of drinking water watersheds for both drinking water and aquatic life. So it supports those partnerships between the downstream drinking water providers and the upstream landowners. The Forest Service is a key, the Forest Service and BLM and EPA are the three key federal partners that bring a lot of funding to the table for these projects. So to be eligible for a project, it has to be within a drinking water source area that contains federal lands. So the black stippled areas are all meet that criteria. So once again, you will see that there is a large overlap with watershed councils, SWCDs, land trusts, all of those conservation partners and the work that you are doing throughout these watersheds. This one does eligible applicants is very wide and well spread out. It is not just public water systems, although they can apply as well. Any kind of state, local government, educational institutions, nonprofits. So this one's pretty wide open on who can apply. Projects can be funded for up to $50,000 per year, and we typically have about $400,000 to $600,000 a year available for this. The federal funding comes through either the Forest Service, BLM, or EPA, and then projects that are a good fit for the source water protection funds that I discussed earlier are referred to the state program, and we ask them to apply there so that our state dollars are enhancing this federal program as well. And then for a lot of the awarded projects, they have to be completed by sort of the end of the first fiscal year after that. So these are can be very short time frame projects as well. So it's a year to 18 months on many of these. This is the one that proposals are due January 8th this year. So there's currently an RFP that is open and available to you if you want to look at it. It is on the GEOS website. So the GEOS Institute website under Working Waters, you will find the Drinking Water Providers Partnership RFP. So that's a great opportunity to connect in and start working with your local either Forest Service or BLM contacts, as well as public water suppliers. One example of the Drinking Water Providers Partnership was the City of Dallas on the upper Rick-Riel watershed, where they had a funding through OWEB and other sources. They have a very large project going on. They applied to the Drinking Water Providers Partnership for a very specific piece. They had stored up logs, and the Drinking Water Providers Partnership was able to provide the funding to airlift those into place. They put in 34 new structures in 2016 throughout that watershed to both improve, fish passage and increase that large woody debris in the streams, but then also significantly contribute towards that cleaner, sustainable drinking water downstream. This project, among the other work that they did, because of the strong partners and their ability to engage the local landowners, including some of the forest management partners, also led the city of Dallas to a successful clean water state revolving fund loan for land acquisition. So they were able to purchase a piece of that watershed and be able to manage the type of land use that occurs there for drinking water quality and habitat. So those are a couple of the two of the most basic sort of funding sources that we have. There are several others that I want to at least just highlight, and if folks have questions or want to explore like how would we partner with each of these programs, you can reach out to me or any of our drinking water protection staff, afterwards. So the Clean Water SRF is also a good option. It can fund non-point source management projects, and as long as it's in our non-point source management program plan. And the drinking water folks work with our non-point source folks at DEQ headquarters to make sure that that program plan includes a lot of the types of projects that we would like to see done for drinking water, as well as for other ecosystem services. There's a sponsorship option within the Clean Water SRF that allows you to combine a non-point source control project with a wastewater facility project. And the wastewater facility project would receive a lower interest rate, and the savings from that lower interest rate can help fund a non-point source project. That was done in the city of Eugene's drinking water source area by the wastewater agency. Did a lot of riparian controls, and I don't know if that's on if that's going to be discussed later, but that's one example. There's also low interest loans or local community loans that can be used by government agencies. So an example there is the Clackamas SWCD was able to, they actually have two of these loans that then they use to give out microloans to either septic system owners or for manure or irrigation management to local landowners so that they can help move along some projects on their lands. I think, as you all know, there's the 319 grant process is available, however, is very limited in Oregon. And so those have to address priorities within the RFP that goes out, which I think should be going out fairly soon. And your contact on that is the DEQ basin coordinators. If you have questions on that one. The other one I'd like to mention is supplemental environmental projects, where respondents to our compliance and enforcement orders are given an option to do a supplemental environmental project with part of that penalty money. This is something that we as DEQ cannot encourage, or we can't tell them what to do. But if you watch and sort of see what kind of, if there's enforcement cases in your areas, it's something that can help provide money to your projects, but you have to work with those respondents to sort of get them on board for doing the SEP. And then DEQ can help with, making sure that that's an adequate project for it. The short story is we can't ambulance chase our own money is sort of where that's going. So you can't go out and solicit projects out of our enforcement dollars, because that's not the way that we do enforcement. So not the reason. And then water systems sometimes have match and money available for that. The other thing I wanted to highlight is the NRCS, the 2018 Farm Bill implemented a new focus on source water protection areas. And we are seeing this at a lot of federal agencies on the national scale. The Forest Service, BLM, have directives within the last couple of years that really specifically ask them to work on drinking water focused projects. So what this has been used for in Oregon, we were in a really good position because we had very strong source water assessments to apply for a number of these projects that are funding watershed assessments in drinking water watersheds throughout Oregon. So over the last 2 fiscal years, we've had 10 of these been approved, and close to $1 million in funding coming into our local SWCDs and watershed councils who are working on these. And I think John Souter will talk about the one down in Coos here a little bit later. If you're interested in those types of projects, they are addressing agricultural land uses and identifying and prioritizing those for future implementation through NRCS's conservation practices. It's important to begin now to discuss those with your local NRCS contacts and tie those to sort of the conservation implementation strategies that NRCS does as well. And I or the source water protection folks can provide you information on that as well. So your local district conservationist can be your best friend on these, and we can provide information on those delineated source areas or where it's applicable. So the next steps for partner organizations like yourselves is to tap into DEQ and our Oregon Health Authority resources. We have a number of both mapping sources and data sources for where the drinking water source areas are and what the potential risks are within those areas, so that you can see where that overlays with your organization's goals and objectives. The updated source water assessments are on our webpage, so you can download. We have original source water assessments that were done before 2005, and then we've added some updated information for both of those. Are available on the DEQ webpage for all surface water systems, and we can get them from OHA if there's groundwater systems that you're interested in. Those contain a number of information that can be really useful to your processes, including things like land use, the erosion, landslide potential for different areas, where the streams and stream crossings are. So there's a lot of different information in those, as well as information on all of the regulated databases. So underground storage tanks or CAFOs or state fire marshal hazardous substance storage locations. So a lot of that information is in the source water assessments. So I'd encourage you to look at those. There's interactive maps, data, and GIS layers for a good share of this information as well, so that you can zoom in on areas. And then we have 2 resource guides, one for surface water and one for groundwater, that provide some really good information. And just so that you all know that these really point people that want to do work in drinking water watersheds towards the local partners. So towards the SWCDs, the watershed councils, and the land trusts as well. So in closing, really the point I wanted to bring home is that those public health issues can really leverage water quality interest and implementation within your areas. It's work that is mutually beneficial to both the public water systems and we think the conservation partners as well. There may be that additional funding there that you may not have access to any other way, and that we are here to help with sort of identifying who those partners are within different basins and funding sources, as well as GIS or mapping support for communities and partners. So I guess I'll end there. There's our contact information is here, and I know Vanessa can send these out afterwards, or you can contact me for any of the information. There's a lot of information on the DEQ drinking water protection website. So feel free to reach out to any of us with questions on where to find specific things or sort of how to get it all together. So the team on the DEQ side includes Jackie Fern in Western region, and then she helps with Eastern region as well. Tessa Edlin for Northwest and Eastern region. And then Josh Seeds is our non-point source specialist and works a lot with both forestry and agriculture. So with that, I think I'll finish up, and then if we'll let Vanessa kick off the panelists.
Before we do the panelists, Julie, there are a couple of other just real questions specific to your presentation. I thought we could squeeze them in.
Sure.
The first one says, do you know why there are so few drinking water source areas mapped in Eastern Oregon?
It's because there's a lot of groundwater sources in Eastern Oregon, and you will see those when you start zooming in on areas. There are not as many surface water intakes used by the cities there. It's not as, I think, plentiful or reliable of a source. So smaller in that respect. I think there's 6 or 7 on the east side.
Okay, very good. The second question says, how many systems can collaborate together to leverage how much funding for a single project? If we are all on the same source, hence downstream of each other.
Yep, great question. Technically, you can have as many as you want on that. The catch is that there's a total of about usually like 200,000, which is maybe 6 projects per year that we are able to fund. And sometimes we have to limit the amount that goes to spread it around, basically. So there's a push and a pull on, how many can combine and leverage together. Sometimes we've asked some of those to resubmit part of their project the next year and to do it in phases.
Okay, very good. I just want to do a check. We were going to hear next from Jared Waybright, who is the Executive Director of the Mackenzie Watershed Council. I believe he is having some technical issues on his end. So I just want to check, Jared, are you with us over the phone line? Okay, I am taking that as no. I will continue working with Jared. He may or may not join us, but we're going to roll with
I'm actually here now, sorry.
Oh, that's okay. Hi, Jared. Okay, Jared, I think I do not have access to your slides, so you're going to have to just wing it and talk to us like human to human, okay?
Well, is there any way that I can log on still, or?
Unfortunately, we can't do it while the broadcast is in motion. So
Right,
if you
okay.
send me your slides, Jared, if you send me your slides, I can load them up and I can run them for you, and we could have either Michelle or John talk while we get that going. Do you want to do that for us?
Yeah, why don't we do that? Because I shared a link, both Google Drive and Dropbox with you this morning.
Okay, check your inbox, okay? Let's hear while we're waiting to connect on Jared's slides to Michelle Smith.
Thanks. And have you given me permission to share yet? Oh, there it is. Okay. Let me make sure that looks okay. And I know you can see the bar. It's a PDF, but it saves me some computer bandwidth. So hoping this will run a little smoother. So I want to just start by thanking Vanessa for inviting me to participate on this panel, and to my fellow panelists as well, and particularly Julie for the great presentation. Thank you. And appreciate Julie's great work and DEQ's great work on source water protection, and would just echo what Julie said, or affirm it, that it's a really helpful resource for folks that are thinking about doing this type of work. So I think to start, wanted to just highlight that I think this panel really highlights the importance, role of land and natural systems play in protecting Oregon's drinking water. And for land trusts in particular, within that, the critical role of protecting these natural landscapes through acquisitions, easements, or other similar tools to ensure they remain intact and healthy into the future. My presentation will probably be the least technical, but for my brief introduction time, I just wanted to share about how land trust work protects Oregon's drinking water, speak about Colt's how Colt's water project that I lead supports this work, and then close with a few on-the-ground examples of land trust. And realize I didn't introduce myself, so I'm Michelle Smith, and I am the water project manager with the Coalition of Oregon Land Trusts, or COLT, as you may know it. And that's actually a good segue. So in case folks aren't familiar with COLT, it is a statewide membership network of 29 separate nonprofit conservation organizations. And what links them together is that they share a common mission to preserve land and make Oregon a better place to live generally. And together, COLT's members protected about 500,000 acres. And COLT works to support land trust work by building community and advocating on behalf of its members, both at the state and federal levels, and then works to bridge gaps and build partnerships between funders, community groups, agencies, and other stakeholders. Within that work, that's my slide, excellent. And we can see the bottom of that, okay? The whole thing? Yeah. Awesome, thanks. So within that work, COLT's water project supports land trusts working to protect clean drinking water. And there were 3 primary drivers for the project. First, COLT knows that reliable, clean drinking water is tied to healthy land. Intact watersheds help filter and store water, keeping water cool, clean, and abundant. And second, COLT recognized that when these lands are protected, they can help ensure secure and resilient water sources for future generations. And then third, and finally, COLT knew that the work of its member land trusts already contributed to clean, secure, resilient water future for Oregon's communities. However, COLT also recognized that despite the clear link between land trust work and drinking water, land trust members had not traditionally prioritized drinking water protection as a conservation outcome. And COLT identified 3 primary barriers as a reason for this. First was new partnerships, so partnerships with community drinking water providers that Julie was referencing, a lack of targeted funding for land acquisition for the protection of drinking water. And as Julie mentioned, Oregon has been really strong in protecting and acquiring land for wildlife, salmon, aquatic species, habitat, but those funding sources aren't as strong for drinking water protection and are also kind of outside the realm of what funding sources land trusts typically leveraged. And then information gaps on how to integrate drinking water considerations into land trust work. Switch slides. So in response to all this information, COLT's Drinking Water Protection Initiative works to bridge these gaps and hopefully accelerate the protection of community drinking watersheds. And it does this by providing resources to land trusts to allow them to be more strategic and purposeful in incorporating drinking water protection into their projects, fosters new partnerships between the community drinking water providers, state agencies, other conservation groups, and land trusts, and then amplifies the importance of land protection and securing clean and resilient drinking water for communities. And so COLT recognized that land trusts are natural partners in protecting drinking water, and what they can bring is expertise in land transactions that communities or drinking water providers are often missing capacity to support those communities that want to protect their drinking watersheds, but don't have the expertise or bandwidth to do so. They also bring an understanding of land conservation, land management, long-term stewardship restoration, familiarity with fundraising, grant development, among other resources that can really help support communities when they're thinking about this work. And so with that kind of really high-level overview, I wanted to highlight some projects that land trusts have been involved with, and I'll start from the one that's actually leveraged the Drinking Water Providers Partnership, and then kind of move from there into one that's leverage some of the other funding sources, and then two that just highlight how land trusts have already partnered or done work that supports drinking water. So the first one is the Finrock Reach project, and this was a partnership with Mackenzie River Trust and the Eugene Water and Electric Board. And Mackenzie River Trust acquired 278 acres in the headwaters of the Mackenzie River between 2015 and 16, and includes 2 miles of riverfront property. And Eugene draws its water from the Mackenzie River. EWEB provided funding for the acquisition through its source water protection program, but the project also included restoration of 80 acres of floodplain that was intended to have benefits of treating pollutants, mitigating floods, and reducing sediment loads. And the Drinking Water Providers Partnership grant funded, supported that restoration project. And I'll also take this slide to highlight that the Mackenzie River Trust is also a member of EWEB's Pure Water Partnership that focuses on source water protection along the Mackenzie. And in that role, it works to engage landowners through the placement of conservation easements on the property to help protect community drinking water. And there are, as of a couple years ago, there were 15 conservation easements in the Mackenzie watershed that covered about 612 acres. So the next one I'll turn to, we'll move to the coast and the Arch Cape project. And so in this project, North Coast Land Conservancy has partnered as a project partner with the Arch Cape sanitary and water districts that are looking to purchase its drinking water shed. And Arch Cape is a small community located on the north coast near Cannon Beach, and it's a forested watershed that is currently privately owned and managed for timber production. And Arch Cape has an interest in purchasing that so that it can manage that land to better protect its drinking water. North Coast Land Conservancy has supported the community by providing capacity around land conservation, transactional expertise, and fundraising. It also has an adjoining acquisition that would help weave this into a larger conserved landscape. And the community is using a variety of funding sources that supports the acquisition, and I've highlighted those with a link to drinking water here, and Julie mentioned these in her presentation, but I'll also mention a key funding source is the Forest Legacy. And what might be interesting connection with the drinking water program is that it is technically possible to use some of those state revolving funds as match for the Forest Legacy program. And so that's a potential way that to weave some of these funding sources together. And then I'll turn to Columbia Land Trust and the Tualatin River and their partnership with Clean Water Services. Columbia Land Trust co-holds 3 easements with Clean Water Services on the Tualatin River, and protecting this land keeps these areas intact and healthy. That helps keep water cool and offsets the impact of stormwater management, of stormwater in the watershed. And these types of natural solutions are a critical part of Clean Water Services' approach to managing stormwater in Washington County. And I'll turn quickly to offer one last one, and that's the Southern Oregon Land Conservancy's Rogue River Preserve. And that protects 2 miles of riverfront above what was City of Medford's backup water intake on the Rogue River that was a supplemental source of water for Medford in the summer months. And while not a formal partnership, it does have the added benefit of co-benefit of protecting drinking water for that community. So with that, I'm going to keep this short and make sure Jared has a chance to talk before he has to jump off. But just a few examples of how land trusts have partnered with water providers to support the protection of drinking water. And I just want to invite everyone to reach out to connect about this work. My contact information is on the slide. Probably should include Zoom these days, but welcome any opportunity to talk about partnerships and how land trusts can support this work. And appreciate your time and look forward to our panel discussion. And Vanessa, I'll turn it back over to you, and I will stop sharing my screen as well. So thank you.
Thank you, Michelle. Perfect. So now Jared is joining us on the phone, and I will be running his slides. So Jared, let us know whenever you are ready to show next slide, just say so, and I will advance them accordingly. Okay. Okay, can you guys see my slides now?
No.
Okay, good. Okay, Jared, you are on. Or is he? Jared, are you here? Uh-oh. Okay, we are having some technical difficulties. I'll give you one more try, Jared. Are you on the phone? Okay, all right. I guess we're gonna keep rolling with the punches here. Mr. John Satter, I'm gonna have you go next. Okay, and we will see how it goes.
Okay, so are we all on here? Are we good? So as Vanessa said earlier, I'm John Souter. I have a joint appointment in Forestry and Natural Resources Extension as a Forest Watershed Extension Specialist. And then I also teach in the Forest Engineering Resources and Management Department at OSU. Prior to coming to OSU in 2015, as some of you know, I spent 15 years as Executive Director of the Coos Watershed Association. So a lot of the work that I'm going to talk about today is informed by both that experience as well as some of the work that I've done since I've come to OSU. And in particular for this project, I want to talk about a study that we're now just finishing the third year of, that was funded by the Oregon Forest Resources Institute called Trees to Tap. And that looked at the effects of active forest management on drinking water source quality. And it was a combination of a very structured science review, basically a literature review that looked at 4 different topics that our steering committee identified as priorities. And those were changes in water quantity and timing as a result of active forest management, changes in sediment and turbidity, forest chemicals, and natural organic carbon and disinfectant byproducts. That was a whole new area to me, and one that we hadn't worked at a lot and focused on when I was with the Watershed Council. And when we talk about active forest management, really what we're focusing on is the effects of timber harvesting, the effects of forest road construction and maintenance, and then revegetation. And so you can see how those 4 topics fit into that active forest management. In addition to the science review, we also did a survey of community water supplies. And Julie talked about there are 156 of those that rely on surface water as their primary source for water that they then treat and distribute. In our survey, we got about 40% response to that. And what we were asking in the survey basically was, what concerns did these community water suppliers have related to forest management in their watersheds? How much control did they think they had over what was going on in their watershed? And then questions about their capacity in terms of staffing and budgets and things like that. And then the third part of the study, which I'm hoping to roll out this spring, is really an atlas for these 156 water suppliers, so that each of their source watersheds will have information to supplement what Julie talked about in their source water assessments with it. And the 2 pieces of information that we were able to develop as a part of this project, thanks to basically freebies from our friends, were changes in forest cover from 1986 to 2019. This was done by Robert Kennedy's group at OSU using a system called Land Trender that basically looks at Landsat aerial imagery and through various interpretive mechanisms infers causal mechanisms for those changes that occur in forest cover over time, such as fire and insect and disease and harvest, things like that. So we have that for the 156 source watersheds, and we also somewhat anticipating the fire hazards in these watersheds. I mean, we have seen this in the past in source watersheds. We saw it 2 years ago in Canyonville, and then Labor Day, we saw a lot of effect on source watersheds as a result of fires. So working with a group at the U.S. Forest Service and the PNW Research Station, we were able to use their modeling to create fire risk analysis for each of these 156 source watersheds. Although it's not exactly 156 because there are a couple of watersheds on the coast that have absolutely no fire risk. So there's no way we could figure out how to burn those things up. But those fire risk maps identify likely sources for ignition, where the fires are likely to spread to, and then how intense the fires are likely to be. And so that's another tool in the source water protection toolbox, because there are fuels reduction strategies that will help reduce that risk for the water supplies. So the results of this study, there's a 300-page report from it. The preliminary results of those are available on the OFRI website, OregonForest.org for it. We're in the final stages of layout for a publication through Extension Communications that will be a book. If you download it, it will be free. I think if you want the hard copy, the analog hard copy of it, it'll probably be about $20. And we're hoping that that will be done in early 2021. And then I'd like to invite everybody to join us in a conference on two half-day conference on March 11th and March 12th to go through the results of this study and to talk with both community water suppliers as well as forest land managers about what their concerns are and hear their responses to what we found in the study. So that's the background, somewhat long-winded background on the project that I want to talk about in specific that was basically a follow-on to this project. And that's the National Water Quality Initiative project that we're doing for the city of Myrtle Point under contract to the Coos SWCD. So Julie briefly mentioned these National Quality Initiative projects. There are 10 set up now in Oregon and 11 is about to start. The one that we have for Myrtle Point was a 2019 study, so we've been working on it for about a year now. And the way that these NWQI studies work is that a group prepares a source water protection plan for it, similar to a watershed assessment. I'll go through that process. Once that plan gets completed and kind of approved by the local water utility, then NRCS considers that group is in the readiness phase to receive additional support to carry out the actions that are in that source water protection plan. And one of those actions is essentially targeted EQIP funds for projects in that source water area. So it's essentially a three-stage process that starts with this drinking water protection plan or source water protection plan for it. These source water protection plans in the NWQI follow a structured approach for standards that were developed through the American Waterworks Association, American National Standards Institute, this G300 source water protection approach that first focuses on creating a vision for the protection of the watershed and involving stakeholders in that. Second does a source water characterization, which is the assessment. Part of that outcome of that source water assessment is identification of program goals and creation of an action plan. And none of this should be surprising to people who are involved in watershed restoration, because we're already doing that for a lot of our other work. And then following basically the assessment and the action plan, you go into an implementation phase and then the evaluation and revision. So this G300 standard essentially is a template for this process that you fit a number of these activities into. So what we did, we were lucky in the case of Myrtle Point, that Myrtle Point was one of the utilities that responded to our survey. And so we already had some good information from them on what their concerns were. And what we found was that there were basically 3 critical concerns that they had. One was fecal contamination, and that's typically from livestock and wildlife, although there's also a fair number of rural residential septic systems, places like that. Transportation related spills, because there are a lot of, as is common, there are a lot of roads in riparian areas close to streams, and a lot of bridges where accidents can happen and spills can take place. And then we had an area in the upper watershed that had a high OHV use. It was a BLM recreation area. BLM and the Coquille Watershed Association and the Coos SWCD are all involved in trying to reduce sediment in that area, but it's a known problem. And then there's a kind of standard list of moderate concerns that we're using basically to structure our source water assessment with. So then that's what we did in terms of the characterization for it. We did use, and Julie mentioned the GIS resources that DEQ has through their source water assessments. That's very good. She also has some very good people on staff to help out with it. So we took a lot of GIS information that was already created for it. That was in terms of the delineations, the data compilations, some of the contaminant source inventories. We then used other sources of data to do a land use analysis for it, particularly zoning and the National Land Classification data set. Again, existing data. We looked at some physical barriers to the movement of pollution of contaminants through the watershed. Particularly, we're going to be focusing on what's called the 8-hour time of travel from a source of contamination to the input for the water treatment plant. We're going to identify information gaps and then hope to use some modeling, a tool called the Soil and Water Assessment Tool to look at where we can put different types of restoration projects on the ground and see what effect that's going to have on contaminants that get to the treatment plant itself. So I talked about a little bit about tools and actions for it. So we're focusing, this is an NRCS program, so we are focusing on using the NRCS's toolbox of restoration activities. As a part of this project, we identified 44 that would seem to be applicable to the source watershed. Those are going to vary by type of land use, whether it's rural residential or agriculture or forested. But we've got a good set of tools to work with out there. There's already been considerable work done in the watershed by the watershed councils and the conservation district in there. So we're going to be looking in terms of a strategy to see how we can leverage those existing investments to apply these tools to get some more benefits for water quality in the watershed for it. And the way we would propose to do that in the case of the Myrtle Point is to use a technique that we developed when I was at the Coos watershed. Some of you may know it. We call it the coffee klatch process of getting folks together in the neighbor shed that we're working in and try and work with those folks through a structured process to prioritize the different types of restoration actions that we think will be useful. And so this system here is basically what's called a multi-attribute scaling approach to it. So we have 7 biological criteria, 8 socioeconomic criteria or implementation feasibility criteria that we're scaling for these different tools. And then we're looking at how well that tool would work in a specific subbasin in the watershed. We're scoring that. There's a weighting criteria up at the top here that goes through the relative importance of these attributes in an overall score. And then what we come out at the end with scores, weighted scores for the implementation feasibility or the socioeconomic, as well as a score for the biological or the effectiveness of this process. And the scores go from 0 to 4. And we, fairly arbitrarily said if something's a 2 or above, it's likely to be useful. And so in the case of the implementation feasibility, if it scores at a 2 or above, it's likely to be implementable. In the case of the biological or the biophysical criteria, if it scores at a 2 or above, it's likely to be effective, at what we want to achieve. And so we've got those 2 different scores, and where both of those scores are over 2, then we kind of rated that tool in that area as effective and give it a green. And if you think about it in the stoplight metaphor, green means go ahead with it. If we get a score that is high in the biophysical criteria in terms of effectiveness, but it's below the 2-point threshold for the implementation feasibility, we kind of classify that as yellow or proceed with caution. Means you probably need to have some demonstrations, you need to do a fair amount of outreach. Conversely, if we have something that is very feasible to implement, which typically means landowners like it, but we don't think it has that high effectiveness in terms of its biophysical meeting our goals, then we rate that as blue, meaning we're kind of cool to it, and maybe somebody else would be better to implement that. And then finally, if they're both below 2, then we give it a kind of red and indicate that it's probably not worth proceeding with. So we can do that. Our plan is to do that with the tools that we have available for us within our CS. The district itself is doing the outreach for it. We're a little concerned about how we're going to be able to do this outreach given the constraints that we have now with COVID. We do have some more time that we're looking at extending the process, and hopefully this miracle of the vaccine will come through, and we'll be able to get with the outreach that we need to really bring people in. And I would want to emphasize that this project, while we're doing it under contract with the Coos SWCD, there's a local steering committee that involves the Coquille Watershed Association, the Coos SWCD, ODF&W, DEQ has folks on it. So there's quite a bit of local buy-in on this, and there's quite a bit of experience that the local partners bring to this. So that is kind of what I would like to go through with it. I'm certainly open to any questions if we have time at the end. And I guess now we have another opportunity to come back and have Jared join us.
Hopefully. This is Vanessa again. I've been talking a little bit with Jared offline, and I'm hopeful that he will be able to go. Jared, are you with us?
Can you guys hear me?
Yay!
Yeah.
Okay.
All right. My apologies,
All right,
everyone.
Okay. Okay, can you guys see the slides?
Yep.
Lovely. Jared, what is meant to do? Here you go.
Well, after that build-up, this better be good. So, but once again, my name is Jared Waybright. I'm the Executive Director of the McKenzie Watershed Council. I've been with the Watershed Council since 2004 in a variety of roles, and really happy to be here with my fellow panelists today. Thank everybody for their presentations. And This presentation is going to focus mostly or entirely on the Drinking Water Providers Partnership grants, but I'd also like to touch base real quick on a couple things that other panelists have touched on, both John and Julie in particular, and kind of give a plug for the conservation investment strategy. We've developed one here locally for the Mackenzie. We have not used it yet, but we've got high hopes that we're going to be able to pull some funding out of that in 2021 for 3 or 4 sites that we're hoping to plant and start some riparian restoration work on. The local NRCS office has been really supportive. We work cooperatively with the SWCD to get that plan in place, and hopefully we can make it happen in 2021. And then there's no time to talk about it because it's super complex, but the state revolving fund, the Clean Water State Revolving Fund, is also something that we've used here locally in a kind of a long, complicated, coordinated partnership with the local wastewater management commission here in Eugene, Springfield, and then brought in a third party, the Freshwater Trust, to actually help manage and provide shade credits that the local wastewater management commission then would realize from implementing these riparian restoration projects. To date, we've implemented 2, and we have plans to implement 2 more in 2021. So that's a good thing to pursue. It's super complex and needs a lot of partners, though. So with that, we'll jump into this presentation. It's relatively short. It's got some nice pictures, and just kind of want to run through how we've utilized the Drinking Water Providers Partnership here in the Mackenzie. So next slide, please. So we've had 7 drinking water provider partnership grants since 2016. They've almost entirely gone toward floodplain, valley bottom restoration projects. A couple on Deer Creek, which you saw previously, and then the most have been on South Fork Mackenzie. And as Michelle talked about, there was also one on Finrock Reach this last year with the Mackenzie River Trust. These applications, we typically max them out, probably average about $47,000. But that's probably more closely due to the fact that some of the earlier ones were a little less. We typically ask for the full 50,000 when we do these. And I'll get into it in a minute. We fund a kind of a range of project activities with this grant, but like Julie said, we're really specific on what we're asking for and what we're delivering and what we can report about. And then I'll talk about a little bit about strategies for who's the actual lead applicant. Next slide. So just, I think this is pretty obvious, and Julie did a good job of presenting this, but we really approach this funding that we're not creating projects specifically around this funding opportunity. First of all, it's not a lot of money, but it's been it's a very flexible and easy to work with funding opportunity. So we really just kind of try to slot this into specific aspects of different larger scale priority projects. And then it aligns really well with different water quality goals and objectives and habitat and species specific goals that we have. We rely on established partnerships that once again fit pretty well with the goals of this program, especially along partnerships with local utilities and municipalities that are the end users of this water. And then, you know, over time, we're really banking on our experience and demonstrated of delivering successful projects year in and year out to this application. So, oh, and then the other thing I would tie into is once again, because you're working with a smaller pot of money here, we really are careful not to overpromise on monitoring or outreach associated with these grants, and where feasible, we tie them into existing programs, that monitoring programs, but typically we're not relying on this funding to actually delivering that monitoring data. Next slide. So we've used this funding for a range of project activities. Primarily, probably about 75% it's gone directly to contracted services, especially with these valley bottom floodplain projects. That's that's by far and away the biggest cost. But we've also used these fundings for planning for these projects, prolonged planning periods, for limited project management for both the Watershed Council and the public agencies. We've used this funding for vegetative grow out for disturbed areas, and we have actually tapped this for a little bit of outreach and monitoring. The outreach went toward a short film that was created for one of these projects, and then monitoring actually was then toward some pit tag arrays for some a project done in partnership with ODF and W around juvenile Chinook monitoring. So, next slide. So once again, Julie did a nice job of kind of outlining that they're looking for tie-ins with a host of goals and objectives, and we really work hard on matching, trying to be holistic on our approach in terms of both meeting or setting and meeting a range of specific objectives. But what we really focus on, because it's drinking water protection, is how these projects are benefiting water quality, and I've kind of called out a couple examples here, how we tie this floodplain work specifically to water quality: hyperreach exchange, resiliency to high flows, bringing back riparian vegetation, and just increased connectivity. Next slide, please. That's Deer Creek again, by the way, project that was just done last year. So this one took a little bit of time to kind of figure out, and if you look closely at the drinking water providers partnerships, there's a lot of partners there, and there's different pots of money that are managed differently. And I'll be honest, I don't completely understand all of that. And we have been the direct applicant in the past, and that can work fine. The MRT was a direct applicant for Finrock, but what we've kind of settled on doing here locally in the McKenzie, it's a little bit more streamlined to actually have the Forest Service as the direct applicant, and then we have a master agreement with the Forest Service, and then this funding is then moved from the Forest Service to the Watershed Councils through a supplemental project agreement of SPA. So kind of a little nuance that probably doesn't fit everybody, but it's one way that we've been able to work that here locally. Next slide. And then just want to end on this one. Once again, Deer Creek, that was implemented in last year. This is obvious, but really our strong working relationship with our local water provider or utility is really key to this. So not only are we looking for letters of support, but we work hard to have the utility provide some funding into the game. Each year we ask them to provide a cash match, which they do. But we also just rely on, once again, that strong working relationship and kind of a demonstrative history of working with our utility. In certain cases, we can highlight how we're actually working with the utility on a specific project. In Deer Creek, we're working the end game for this project is the realignment of power lines, and so anywhere where we can show that cooperative approach with the utility, I think just strengthens the application. And then once again, everything in the application is cited back to the local utilities' goals and objectives, and in certain cases where it's available, identified threats to water quality. It's really important to know what that background is and to cite that in the application. So I believe that is it.
Thank you so much, Jared. We really appreciate it. And I know that you finagled your schedule such that you could join us. Before we let you go, friends who are joining us online, does anybody have any questions for Jared?
And I can
Jared,
stay a little. I could probably stay till 3:30.
Perfect. Okay. So tell you what, we have one question queued up, and that is for Julie Harvey, and I'm going to go ahead and ask that. And then that is a cue for all of you listening. If you have questions for Jared or any of our panelists, go ahead and type them in now. So this is a question for Julie. It says, how can we find out if there is a pending fine to try and receive supplemental environmental projects?
You know, the best way is to go to the Gov Delivery on DEQ's website and sign up for notifications in your area, and they will typically notify when there are enforcement actions in the area. You can also contact our Office of Enforcement and Compliance, and they used to keep a list of potential projects so that they could suggest those or just hand those out with the SEP paperwork to respondents. And I'm not sure if they're doing that anymore, but connecting up with our Offices of Compliance and Enforcement would work well as also.
Very good. I think this question is for Jared, but if it doesn't pertain to Jared, I think anybody could take it. Will the research uncover show the age class changes on the landscape as well as land use changes?
Oh, that might have been for me. This is John Souter. So what we did with the forest cover change map is essentially used, or what Robert Kennedy's group did was essentially use a series of Landsat images. And so what we can tell from that with a reasonable degree of certainty is things that are going out of forest cover and then things that are growing up into forest cover. And something that's considered to be growing into forest cover when it's about 7 to 15 feet tall or so. And so, yes, we can do that on an annual basis. You can see what's being lost and then what's being regrown into that forest cover class. And these are done by the 30-meter pixel size that Landsat uses.
And John, is it correct
Okay,
those
very
aren't
good.
available quite yet, or?
Well, we will have hopefully in the spring when the book gets out. Then the next thing on my task list is to do the atlas. So what we are planning to provide is essentially a figure or a chart with it every year from the 1986 to 2019 with the amount of changes on a percent basis or on an acre basis for that source watershed. The maps are available for that, so you could look at that on an individual area as well. And the larger the land trender site that was the genesis for this project, if you go to OSU or you search on land trender for it, you should be able to see some of the maps, and some of that stuff I think you can model in real time as well. So you can do basically a movie of an area of interest and look at the cover change in that.
Very good. Here's a question for Julie, and then kind of a two-parter. The first part's for Julie, and the second part is for the other panelists. Julie, what do you see as common barriers for people who are just beginning to think about partnering with DEQ on drinking water partnerships? What are some of the common stumbling blocks and things that you think they could easily circumvent if they thought ahead about them?
Yeah.
And then the second part,
I would say for one.
Oh, I'll ask the second part in a minute.
Oh, go ahead. Do you want to finish
the second part
part?
for the panelists is just if you guys, as existing partners of DEQ, after Julie has a chance to answer, if you could offer some best advice for new partners for DEQ, things you wish you had known at the outset of your adventure.
That's a great question. I would say, first and foremost, it's making that connection with the public water supplier in your area. And it's not hard to identify them. We have the resources for that. But due to some of those limitations that they have, there's always some education on their part as to why source water protection is important and why you guys need to work together. So I would say that initial contact between the water system and the conservation partner is really it's that first stepping stone, and it's a really important one to sort of build that support within the community. With some of the grants programs, there are definitely some hitches in how they work. I think, as Jared mentioned, the Forest Service money that comes out of the Drinking Water Providers Partnership is to those Forest Service offices and on the ground almost immediately. The Drinking Water Source Protection Fund goes through Business Oregon, and it takes a little while to contract. So there's definitely some subtleties in each of those different funding sources, and we can help you with those as you're exploring sort of what might be the best fit for a specific project that you want to use. Maybe I'll stop there and let the other panelists sort of hear your experiences as well.
Well, I can talk, this is John Souter. I can talk a little bit about a couple of the programs that we worked with DEQ when I was at the Coos Watershed Association. I'll add a bit of caution. If you get involved in the supplemental environmental projects, be aware that you're going to be dealing with lawyers, and you're going to be dealing with people who aren't very happy that they're having to spend money as a result of a fine for it. And so there are a different set of standards involved with supplemental environmental projects than there are with your common grant funded projects. There's not much, if any, flexibility in timing or in what gets done for it. So a word of caution with that. The National Water Quality Initiative projects, I think, are a great opportunity for councils, districts, and land trust with it. Of the 10 projects that are currently being implemented, I would say that probably 2/3 of those are being done through either conservation districts or watershed councils for it. So people are picking up on that. The NWQI projects tend to have more funding associated with them than the DEQ projects do as well. So I think that's a real opportunity for folks out there.
This is Jared, and I'd kind of build on what both Julie and John said. Julie in particular, in addition to just, if you're not already, getting to know and partnering with your local utility is really paramount. But in addition to that, kind of like I mentioned, getting to know who your wastewater management commission or organization is done wonders for us here in the McKenzie. The program, the shade credit program that we developed here in the McKenzie, never would have happened without the inside advocacy of their staff. We never would have gotten in front of their board in a way to approve the funding that they've approved, which is millions of dollars, without that inside partnership. Similarly with partnering with NRCS, just getting to know, if you don't know your local NRCS folks, and here in Eugene, Springfield, Upper Willamette, they share an office with the SWCD, and so it's actually the SWCD that created that CIS strategy for the McKenzie, and once again, it just all comes down to partnerships. And really, the council itself spends very little time directly coordinating with DEQ, with the partnership structures that we've developed. And so to me, it's easy, quite honestly, because most of that work is done through just that network.
And I'll end this portion. I'll just reiterate again that partnership piece of it. That was one barrier that we identified as a barrier for land trusts working with drinking water, is making those connections that may be outside of the traditional partnerships that conservation organizations are used to working in. So I think partnerships, understanding how this work impacts drinking water and water quality, I think, and not just for wildlife, but for communities. And so really for ourselves making that linkage so we can be purposeful and think about opportunities to partner. And then also, as Julie said, working with the community water providers to think about how source water protection can benefit them and where there's mutual benefit for their treatment costs and kind of long-term financials. So I think those two, and then I'll give a plug for DEQ and Julie again, just making those connections and partnerships have been really helpful. I think these grant programs can be really complex and again, outside of what conservation groups are typically dealing with. And there are a lot of nuances, but I think there is possibility there. So Drinking Water Providers Partnership and the others that Julie mentioned can really help add to some of the work that groups are already doing. So I think those pieces are really helpful. And I'll just mention on the land trust side, on Colt's website, there's a new case study on the Arch Cape project that highlights kind of how land trusts have partnered with the Arch Cape community and a little bit more specifics on kind of the funding programs and what that partnership looked like and how I think importantly conservation groups can support communities wanting to protect their drinking water. So.
I believe that concludes our time, friends. So I just want to say thank you to Julie and Michelle and John and Jared for weathering through our technical challenges and providing such good and rich content for all of you today. And I hope that you will really take advantage of the opportunities being provided by DEQ and reach out to Julie as you have questions. This concludes our webinar series for 2020, friends. And so keep your eye peeled for 2021. We will be announcing webinars as they become scheduled. And I want to let you know that the Oregon Conservation Partnership will also, in addition to these regular webinars, will be offering a series of distinguished speaker series that will focus on various topics related to diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice as they relate to conservation and restoration work. So please keep your eye on our listserv and on our website and reach out to me if you have any questions. Thanks all for joining us. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Okay, take care, everyone.